My wife thought she was stepping into a world of power and prestige. She didn't know she was stepping into fraud, audits, and a collapse that would erase every illusion. The year was 2021, and I lived in Austin, Texas. I held a position as a financial analyst at a prominent investment firm, a role that demanded precision, patience, and an awareness of subtle patterns. My wife, Madison, worked as the marketing director of a rapidly expanding green technology startup, a company whose mission promised innovation and social impact. From the outside, our life looked flawless. A spacious apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city parks, weekend getaways, regular dinners with friends and family, invitations to social events and fundraisers. Everything seemed meticulously curated, each element reflecting success and stability. I often allowed myself a quiet pride in the life we had built together, a life that appeared, to anyone passing by, free of tension or struggle. But beneath the surface, I had begun to sense the faint vibrations of fracture. Madison started staying late at the office more frequently, attending evening networking events that often stretched past dinner hours. I found myself alone in our apartment more often than not, staring at the glow of my computer screen, immersed in spreadsheets and financial reports that felt both comforting and isolating. I noticed her subtle changes, the way her smile sometimes faltered when we discussed shared plans, the way her eyes would flinch at questions about money or future investments, and the subtle comparisons she made between our life and the lives of her colleagues. It was as though our shared life, once stable and intimate, had begun to exist alongside a separate hidden existence she navigated with quiet efficiency. At first, I resisted acknowledging the discomfort I felt. The creeping unease, the occasional sharpness in her tone, I attributed to stress, workload, or exhaustion. I clung to the patterns of normalcy, convincing myself that these were minor ripples on the calm surface of our life. Yet each evening alone, surrounded by the quiet hum of the apartment and the faint city lights beyond our windows, the feeling grew heavier. I began to notice details I had previously ignored. The barely touched glass of wine on the counter, the unopened invitations to dinners we had once attended together, the lingering scent of her absence that filled the rooms in her place. My mind cataloged these small fractures, but I dismissed them as inconsequential. The illusion of stability was powerful, almost intoxicating. I held on to it like a lifeline, resisting the idea that the life I had invested in so completely might not be as secure as I believed. My hope for continuity became a quiet, stubborn obsession. I focused on my routines, on my work, on the numerical certainties of my spreadsheets, allowing the emotional and relational subtleties to blur into the background. I told myself that what mattered was that we appeared fine, that outwardly, everything was orderly, respectable, enviable even. I did not yet realize that appearances were no longer reliable indicators of reality, and that beneath the polished surface, the foundation was already shifting, unseen and unstoppable. Even as I noticed the fissures, I clung to the belief that everything would remain intact, that Madison's long hours and distant expressions were temporary, that our life together remained whole. I was blind in the most dangerous way possible, willingly ignoring the early tremors in favor of the comforting architecture of routine. The stability I cherished was no longer a reflection of reality, but a carefully maintained narrative I told myself each night. The breaking point arrived during Madison's annual investor gala, a lavish event held in a grand hall overlooking the Colorado River. The space was drenched in warm lights that reflected off polished wood and glass, casting long shadows across the elegantly dressed guests. I walked beside her at first, smiling politely, nodding at familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries that felt increasingly hollow. Madison moved through the room with effortless confidence, her presence commanding attention even from across the crowded hall. She approached Dylan Hart, a prominent venture capitalist whose reputation and charm were impossible to ignore. His every gesture, the subtle tilt of his head, the way he carried himself, radiated influence and dominance. I stood there, frozen in the flow of the gala, feeling the slow, insidious weight of invisibility settle over me. Each laugh she shared with him, every leaning glance, every brush of her hand across his arm amplified the sense that I was merely a shadow, a background element in a performance I had once thought was ours. The conversations around me felt muffled, distant, as if I were listening through a thick wall. Guests I had greeted hours earlier now passed without acknowledgement, their eyes skimming over me as if I were part of the furniture. The realization hit with a quiet, suffocating force. I was no longer a participant in this world, no longer a partner in Madison's life as I had imagined. I existed only to maintain the illusion of harmony, to fill a seat, to smile and nod, while the narrative of success, charm, and influence played out around me without me. The subtlety of the humiliation was staggering. No one spoke to undermine me directly. No one cast a critical glance. Yet the hierarchy was undeniable, a silent structure of power and attention that I could not penetrate. I became acutely aware of the way her posture shifted when she spoke to Dylan. The slight lean that indicated intimacy, the sparkle in her eyes that I had not seen directed at me in months. Each detail of the evening carved a line of clarity across the fog of my assumptions. My role, the one I had once believed equal and secure, had eroded, replaced by something peripheral and insignificant. By the end of the night, as the hall emptied and the river below shimmered in moonlight, I understood that my sense of stability had been an illusion. My previous confidence in the control I wielded over my personal life and the shared life with Madison collapsed silently within me. There was no single insult, no dramatic confrontation, only the quiet, relentless awareness that I had lost footing. The world I had trusted, the structure of home, love, and partnership, had begun to shift beneath me. I returned home that evening with a weight in my chest that refused to dissipate. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt hollow. The soft hum of the city beyond the windows seemed distant, irrelevant. I replayed each interaction, each glance, each laugh, turning them over in my mind, forcing myself to face the truth I had avoided. The first crack had appeared, and I could no longer ignore it. The foundations of our life, the carefully constructed facade of stability, had begun to fracture, and I was now a witness to the slow unraveling of everything I had believed secure. After the gala, I began a methodical process of gathering information, sifting through every detail of Madison's professional life and her network. I accessed corporate documents, investment summaries, and bank statements, materials I had the right to see as both husband and partner, yet had never examined closely before. At first, the work felt mechanical, a series of numbers and reports on a screen, but soon patterns emerged. Subtle irregularities refused to be ignored. Unexplained transfers, ambiguous contracts, and expenses absent from official accounting all hinted at something hidden beneath the polished exterior of the startup. I remembered the legacy left to me by my late uncle, a former attorney with expertise in auditing and asset protection, who had granted me access to legal archives and financial instruments designed to safeguard assets and uncover irregularities. With these tools, I turned my attention to family documents and Madison's business records, moving beyond the immediate and mundane into a network of hidden connections. The more I delved, the more I uncovered. Offshore accounts tied to shell companies, complex structures for moving significant sums of money, and financial maneuvers that skirted or outright violated normal disclosure. The process was painstaking and required meticulous attention. I traced transactions line by line, cross-referencing invoices, emails, and contract dates, reconstructing sequences that Madison had assumed invisible. Each anomaly built upon the last, forming a pattern that was impossible to dismiss. It became clear that what had seemed like ordinary domestic disputes, minor disagreements about budgets or work-life balance, were superficial symptoms of a deeper, systemic problem. Betrayal was not confined to our marriage. It extended into professional spheres, intertwining personal deception with corporate vulnerability. As I pieced together the puzzle, a chilling clarity settled over me. The life I had assumed to be stable was layered over a lattice of secrets, financial maneuvering, and calculated risk. Each discovery revealed more than just Madison's duplicity. It exposed the fragility of the systems we relied upon and the extent to which appearances could mask reality. The illusion of safety and routine had masked a network of control and manipulation, and I realized that I had only just begun to understand the scope of what I was facing. By the end of those long nights, surrounded by files, spreadsheets, and legal notes, I felt a mix of dread and clarity. The personal betrayal had merged with a professional awakening. The patterns were no longer random. They formed a coherent, undeniable truth. I could no longer ignore what I had seen. The cracks that had first appeared at the gala were not isolated moments. They were part of a larger architecture of deception, one that required careful thought, planning, and strategy if I were to protect myself and reclaim control. Once the scope of Madison's actions became undeniable, I knew that I could not act impulsively. I gathered a team of independent lawyers, compliance experts, and former financial intelligence officers, each chosen for their discretion, precision, and ability to operate in gray areas without drawing attention. Together, we began to map the situation, identifying vulnerabilities, risks, and potential leverage points. Every step had to be legally sound, timed to the minute, and executed in a way that left no trace of hasty reaction. I created detailed plans for the protection of my personal and shared assets, ensuring that each account, investment, and property holding was shielded. Copies of critical documents were duplicated and stored securely. I established encrypted digital formats and physical vaults, and private channels for communication that could not be intercepted or monitored. Every transaction, transfer, and adjustment was measured to avoid tipping off Madison or her associates, to prevent panic, and to maintain the appearance of routine stability. At the same time, I began a quiet redistribution of financial resources, moving funds into protected accounts, securing access to inheritance and business assets, and positioning investments in ways that insulated them from any sudden claim. To the outside world, my behavior remained calm, almost indifferent. I allowed Madison to believe that nothing had changed, that I was still complacent, still the husband who trusted her implicitly. Each decision, each maneuver, was guided by rationality rather than emotion. Betrayal had ignited a cold, analytical focus. Every action served a dual purpose: appearing passive while simultaneously constructing a foundation for control, a network of security and influence that would allow me to dictate outcomes rather than be swept along by events. I documented everything meticulously, not for revenge, but to ensure clarity and leverage, to convert uncertainty into actionable knowledge. I spent hours reviewing contracts, tracing financial flows, and simulating outcomes, testing each move against possible responses from Madison and her allies. I considered every scenario, from overt resistance to subtle sabotage, and ensured that the plan could absorb shocks and adapt. The emotional pain of betrayal was transformed into calculation. Hurt became foresight, anger became strategy, and fear became preparation. By the time the first week of planning ended, I had a blueprint that encompassed legal, financial, and tactical dimensions. I was no longer simply reacting to Madison's duplicity. I was preparing to control its consequences. Every seemingly neutral action was part of a larger orchestration, a careful choreography of perception and influence. The quiet calm I projected masked an intricate web of strategy, one designed to protect my life, reclaim autonomy, and turn the vulnerability exposed by betrayal into a position of measured power. The execution of the strategy began with precision, a sequence of audits, regulatory inquiries, and legal actions that unfolded quietly but relentlessly. Financial regulators and independent corporate auditors examined the structures Madison and her associates had relied upon, following trails of transactions that I had meticulously documented. Each report, each flagged irregularity, slowly became a thread unraveling the web of deception. The anomalies I had discovered months earlier, offshore accounts, phantom companies, unrecorded transfers, were now corroborated, validated, and undeniable. Accounts were frozen, contracts suspended, and previously untouchable partners faced scrutiny and public exposure. Dylan Hart's reputation, once untouchable and built on charm and intimidation, began to crumble under the weight of revealed misconduct. Madison, caught in the tidal wave of consequences, lost her position, her influence evaporating as her role in the network of mismanagement and manipulation became clear. I observed it all with a calm detachment that surprised even me. There was no satisfaction in vengeance, no pleasure in seeing individuals falter, only a meticulous recording of cause and effect. Every reaction, every public statement, every frozen account confirmed the system I had pieced together. The mechanisms of manipulation, no matter how intricate or hidden, were finite, vulnerable, and ultimately transparent when faced with careful observation and preparation. The illusion of omnipotence, the quiet arrogance of believing one could bend rules indefinitely, dissipated before my eyes. I noted the patterns of exposure, the cracks in previously solid facades, and the way truth surfaced even where deceit had seemed absolute. The world I had feared collapsing under betrayal instead revealed a principle I had not fully appreciated: that structures built on hidden leverage, control, and intimidation were impermanent, and that exposure, once engineered methodically, was inevitable. As each day passed, the cascade of revelations continued. Madison faced internal inquiries, professional colleagues distanced themselves, and former allies questioned their own involvement. I kept detailed records of the unfolding events, ensuring that no unexpected turn could threaten the order I had established. The strategy's execution validated every calculation I had made, demonstrating that rational, deliberate action could transform chaos into clarity, vulnerability into security, and betrayal into knowledge. By the time the final investigations concluded, the network of lies and manipulation lay exposed. The illusion of Madison's invincibility and Hart's dominance had been shattered. I stood back, observing the aftermath with dispassionate scrutiny, aware that the truth had not merely emerged but had redefined the playing field entirely. The collapse was methodical, unstoppable, and absolute, yet I felt no triumph, only the quiet affirmation that careful preparation, patience, and unwavering focus allowed me to reclaim control of a life that had been threatened by deception and duplicity. The divorce was finalized quietly, executed with precision and legality, leaving no room for scandal or lingering disputes. I left the apartment that had once represented security and shared dreams, a space now saturated with memories of betrayal, and moved to a neighborhood I had never imagined myself living in, a place that felt neutral, unclaimed, a canvas for the life I would build. Every possession I carried with me was chosen deliberately, a careful separation from the past, while every item left behind became a symbol of closure rather than loss. My professional life shifted as well. I joined an independent consulting firm, smaller, focused, and free from the political machinations that had surrounded my previous career. The work demanded precision and insight, and through it I rediscovered a sense of control, competence, and purpose. I approached each challenge with calm rationality, transforming the lessons of betrayal and manipulation into strategies for problem-solving, both for clients and for myself. The past no longer dictated my emotions. It became a record, a set of observations, a map of what to recognize and avoid. There was no desire for revenge, no indulgence in bitterness, only clarity, calm, and focus on constructing a life of my own choosing. In time, I met Claire. She was an urban planning analyst, dedicated to understanding cities not merely as structures, but as living systems shaped by human decisions. She recognized my diligence, my steadiness, and the quiet integrity that had survived the collapse of the life I once knew. With her, interactions were honest, deliberate, and reciprocal. There was no pretense, no hierarchy of power or expectation of social performance, only mutual respect and a growing sense of trust. Gradually, our lives intertwined, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through shared projects, thoughtful conversation, and the simple act of building a home together that reflected our values. The new apartment became more than a residence. It became a laboratory for life redesigned. I arranged each room deliberately, spaces for work, reflection, and rest, an environment that mirrored the calm and order I had cultivated internally. The routines I established reinforced autonomy and choice. Mornings of focused work, afternoons of exploration, evenings of reading or collaborative planning with Claire. Each day reaffirmed a principle I had learned painfully over the past years. True power is not in dominance or control over others, but in the consistent ability to remain true to oneself, in choosing a path aligned with one's own values, and in resisting external pressures to conform, compromise integrity, or surrender agency. Through reflection, I understood that freedom was inseparable from responsibility. Stability arose not from the predictability of others, but from the deliberate construction of my own life. I carried forward the lessons of betrayal not as wounds but as wisdom, allowing me to navigate relationships, professional opportunities, and social expectations with measured clarity. In Claire's presence, I no longer measured myself against illusions or appearances. Instead, I engaged fully, knowingly, with authenticity and respect. In this new life, I had no need for revenge, no desire to rewrite the past, no reliance on external validation. My strength was internal, cultivated through observation, experience, and deliberate action. Each decision, each project, each relationship was rooted in autonomy and careful consideration. I had transformed pain into perspective, loss into discernment, and betrayal into the capacity to see truth clearly. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I moved forward with steady confidence, aware that the foundation I had rebuilt was resilient, flexible, and entirely my own.